Welcome to chapter 4 of the book of Leviticus. Begins the sin offering for the chief priest. I think the King James calls him the high priest, but the chief is what we have. And it begins, and the Lord spoke to Moses, Kyrios, spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, the imperatives, tell them, saying, if a soul should sin unintentionally from all of the orders of the Lord, of which things he must not be doing, and shall do any one of them, if then the anointed chief priest, archierevs, archi is the chief, if the anointed chief priest should sin to cause the people to sin, then he shall bring for his sin of which he sinned an unblemished calf from out of the oxen to the Lord for the sin. Now, let's go up to the New Testament, and I think it explains this pretty well. The 10th chapter of Hebrews helps a lot. It says, for the law, having a shadow of the good things about to be, is not itself the very image of the things which they offer yearly with the same sacrifices. It's talking about back in Leviticus, in perpetuity, and at no time is able to perfect the ones coming forward. So it's not able to perfect them, since they would not have ceased to be offered. It's basically saying if one time it was perfected everything, then they wouldn't have to continue offering, but they did. So that shows that the offerings and the whole thing of Leviticus was a covering of it was going on and on and on, not like what we will see with Christ, who did it once. And it continues, on account of the ones serving once being cleansed have nothing any longer of a conscience of sins. But in these sacrifices, there is a remembrance of sins yearly. Basically, Christ cleans it. It's cleansed once for all. He doesn't have to die over and over again as the sin offering. But here, these things were done yearly. And then it continues, for it is impossible blood of bulls and of he-goats to remove sins. It's an impossibility. Therefore, entering into the world, he says, sacrifice and offering you wanted not, but a body you readied for me. Whole burnt offerings and sacrifices for sins you thought not well of. Then I said, behold, I come. In the roll of the scroll it has been written concerning me, to do, O God, your will. Is talking about Christ. By earlier saying that sacrifice, and then that right here shows where that appears. It's in Psalms 46:8. By earlier saying that sacrifice and offering and whole burnt offerings and for sin offerings you wanted not, nor think well of, which are offered according to the law, as we see in Leviticus, then he said, behold, I come to do, O God, your will. Christ. In this he does away with the first. Now they don't have to do these sacrifices, which they don't do anyway in Israel, that the second should be established, which is Christ, by which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. So did it one time. It's not necessary, this whole rigmarole of the mainline church of turning the body and blood and all of these different ritualistic things are not necessary. We don't need a priest. We don't need him to change anything. Jesus Christ has done the all, once for all, not just for certain ones or at a certain time. And indeed, every priest stands daily officiating in the Old Testament and offering the same sacrifices often, which at no time are able to remove sins. It's an atonement. We'll see where this is an atonement. We're doing something for God to make up for the sins that we're doing, but it doesn't get rid of the sins. We still have the sins, or we're still guilty. But he, having offered one sacrifice for sins in perpetuity, forever, sat at the right of God for the remaining time, looking out until his enemies be placed as a footstool of his feet, till the end, the judgment. For by one offering he has perfected in perpetuity the ones having been sanctified, us. He has perfected it. We go through Christ. We don't go, if you go through a priest, you're basically wasting your time of any church. You can go right straight to Christ. It's like, why would you go through there? Because if he's doing things terrible and sinful, then what is he going to do? Nothing. The high priest in the Old Testament went in, but we see in Leviticus, if he sinned, then he had to do something. But here, if we go to a priest in a New Testament church, what can they do? Nothing, because Christ has done everything. They're just standing in the way. Get out of the way, priests. And the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, bears witness to us also. For after he describes beforehand, this is the covenant which I will ordain with them after those days, says the Lord, putting my laws upon their hearts and upon their thoughts. I will describe them and their sins and their lawless deeds, and no way shall I remember any more. But where there is a release of these, there is no longer an offering for sins. So that's why we don't offer anymore. So if you go to any place and they're trying to offer for sins, it's not going to do anything. So it continues in verse 4 of Leviticus again. But before we go there, there's another thing I wanted to point out here in some place where I have to find it here. Then he shall bring a sin. Okay. So now the high priest, if he should sin, what's he bring? An unblemished calf from out of the oxen to the Lord for the sin. So unblemished. Now, I looked up that word, amomon, in the New Testament, and there are 4 mentions of conditions of unblemished. One is an individual. It says in Ephesians 1:4, as he chose us in him before the founding of the world, for us to be holy and unblemished before him in love. And mainly in love there. Now we're going to have blemishes for sure. We all have blemishes, do things, but the love for people is of utmost importance to God. Then in Ephesians 5:27 of the assembly or the church, whichever you want to call it, it says that he should present it, that is the assembly, to himself, the honorable assembly, not having stain or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and unblemished. As we are the individual, so is the assembly to be that way. And the third of the ones, conditions of unblemished, is Jesus. And it says in Hebrews 9:14, how much more the blood of the Christ, who through eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God. So Christ was unblemished. And then 1 Peter 1:19 says, and he, knowing that you were not ransomed by corruptible gold or silver from out of your vain behavior, handed down from your fathers, but by the esteemed blood of Christ, and in parentheses, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless. Exactly as he's saying here. Christ is doing this. And now here as it brings in from the oxen, but different animals for different sacrifices. And then in Jude 1:24-25, it says, but to him being able to keep them steady and to stand them in front of his glory unblemished in exaltation. Jesus is able to bring us unblemished. But to the only wise God, our deliverer, be glory and greatness, might and authority, even now and into all the eons. God, Jesus, is able to bring us unblemished. God sees us as unblemished. He's not going to bring us with blemishes. He can't, because we have to be unblemished. So Jesus cleanses us. The last of the conditions of the unblemishedness are in Revelation 14:5. We are told of the 144,000, and in their mouth was not found a lie, for they are unblemished. Exactly who they are, and we'll have to go through Revelation with us and find out. So now we go back up here to 4, and it says, and he shall bring the calf by the door of the tent of the testimony, and I should have opened that up again to find open recent, and the sanctuary is there. So he brings it in. There it is again in front of that altar by the door of the tent of the testimony. So it's actually, it brings it closer there. And he shall place his hand upon the head of the calf before the Lord, now in the high priest, I guess, and shall slay the calf in the presence of the Lord. And the anointed priest, having perfected the hands, everything is done right, and taking from the blood of the calf, even he shall carry it into the tent of the testimony. Now, we see here the Christos, the anointed priest. It's a adjective that can stand as a substantive. It didn't have priest. It could just say, and the Christos taking, having perfected the hands. If it didn't have priest, it would be the anointed one, because it doesn't. Then it becomes as a noun. It's a noun substantive. It takes the place of the noun. But here it's a modifying another word. What is it modifying? It's modifying priest. So here we have the anointed priest, and Christos is an anointed one. The charisma, and you can read all these words, look up these in the analytical lexicon and the lexical concordance and so forth. So anyway, now he has, the anointed priest has basically anointed with oil. He's taken the blood, carries it into the tent, and the priest shall dip the dactylon, dactyl is fingers, into the blood, hemoglobin, and shall sprinkle of the blood 7 times with the finger before the Lord at the holy veil. So now he's inside, he's taken the blood and he's sprinkling it towards the inner veil 7 times with this blood. And the priest shall put from the blood of the calf upon the horns of the altar of incense, which is on the inside. The altar of incense is, I believe, where is it at? It's number 4. There it is there. So he takes it, and there's horns on that altar. He takes them, puts the blood on the horns. The incense, the altar of incense of the composition before the Lord, and that's the frankincense and different things that burn, make an aroma, which is in the tent of the testimony, and he shall pour all the blood of the calf. Now here we got pour and sprinkle, and a pastor of a church that believes in infant baptism, and they pour the water on the head. Did call me up. He said he liked the Apostolic Bible, thought it was really great, except I got it wrong with baptizo, the baptize. He said, you can pour it on them. You don't have to dip them. And I said, well, okay, if that's what you think, but if God wanted him to sprinkle them, he would have used the word rantizo, pro serrani, which is part of that word. And if he wanted to pour it, would be cheo, he would pour the water, but he used baptizo, which means to immerse. So God got it right, but you got it wrong. And he shall pour it by the basin, the base of the altar of the yield offering, which is by the doors of the tent of the testimony, and goes out and pours it by the outer whole burnt offering, the other altar, the big one where they burnt on it, pours the blood there. And all the fat of the calf of the sin offering, even he shall remove from it the fat covering up the entrails, and all the fat upon the entrails and the 2 kidneys, and the fat upon them by the thighs, and the lobe upon the liver, with the kidneys he shall remove it, in which manner he removes from the calf of the sacrifice of the deliverance offering. And the priest shall offer upon the altar of the yield offering, the big one, even the skin of the calf and all of its flesh, the dermatology, skin, and sarcophagus, hold the dead flesh, coffin, with the kephali, cephalic, has to do with the head, the extremities, the belly, and the dung. And they shall bring forth the entire calf, olon, whole, comes from that, exo, outside the camp, into a clean place. Katharon, cathartic, cleaning, and topon, topography, all these derivatives found in our English derivatives book, where they shall pour out the ashes, and they shall incinerate it upon wood by fire. It shall be burnt upon the outpouring of the ashes. Now, unintentional sins, and if all the congregation of Israel should not know, it being unintentionally done, so not the high priest, and the thing should be unaware from the eyes of the congregation, ophthalmon, ophthalmology, synagogue, and they should do one trespass from all of the commandments of the Lord, which should not be done, and they should trespass, and the sin should not be made known to them which they sinned by it, then the congregation shall bring a calf from out of the oxen, unblemished, for the sin offering, and it shall bring it, that is the congregation, by the doors of the tent of the testimony, and the elders of the congregation shall place their hands upon the heads, because this isn't the high priest, so all the elders, the head ones of the congregation, for the unintentional sins of the people, they put their hands on the head of the calf before the Lord, there at the tent, and they shall slay the calf before the Lord. And the anointed priest shall carry from the blood of the calf into the tent of the testimony. And now here again I got it, vopsi, he shall dip, vopsi, his finger, baptizo is to immerse, and here vopsi is to dip, his finger from the blood of the calf, and shall sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the holy veil. It does the same thing. And from the blood the priest shall place upon the horns of the altar of the incenses of the composition, which is before the Lord, which is in the tent of the testimony, as he did in the first time with the high priest. And he shall pour out all the blood before the base of the altar of the yield offering. So he goes back outside and he goes into the other altar, pours it out. The one being before the door of the tent of the testimony. So that's the one that's before the door. So there's the door, and so the altar is here. And there's the incense before the inner veil. Learning a lot here, aren't we? It's really wonderful. And he shall remove all of its fat from it, and shall offer it upon the altar. And he shall offer, see now offer here, 4160 is the verb to be, it's the verb to do. And it depends on the context. You wouldn't say, and he did the calf, he offered the calf. So it changes with this one, 4160. So whenever you see 4160, know, as I mentioned many times, that this is the number 1 verb in the Bible, to do, and it can be changed easily to fit what the doing is. And here it's the offering. In which manner he offered, I put did here, I made it literal, the calf, the one of the sin offering, and so it shall be done. Now, and the priest shall atone for them, and the sin shall be forgiven them. Now, the atonement is interesting, and I looked up this word, and as you can see, 1837.2, so that means it doesn't appear in the New Testament, because if it appeared in the New Testament, it wouldn't have the decimal. So this word, atonement, doesn't appear anywhere in the New Testament. So now, its exilosate comes from exiloskome. That is the word, the root word, the dictionary word, exiloskome. Now you could, ex is a prefix from ek, going from, and it's a preposition, and it's tied in front of elaskome, which happens over and over in the Bible, where they put these prepositions from, by, on, under, which would be English preposition, along with the word, the verb, to bury. If it was in Greek, ipotaphi, I guess it would be, to bury under. The Greek word shows a lot, tells us a lot, more than English would take a couple of words. But anyway, the reason I'm pointing this out, this atonement doesn't appear in the New Testament. And I looked up elaskome, the root word, which is number 2433. It does appear only in Hebrews 2:17. It says, whereupon, outside of, I think, one other place which wasn't relevant to this. It also has other meanings, elaskome, like having, I forgot, overlook it. And whereupon, in Hebrews 2:17, it says, whereupon he owed in all things to be likened to the brothers, that he should become a merciful and trustworthy chief priest in the things towards God, so as to atone the sins of the people. So Christ becomes the atonement, and then we have the atonement seat, but it's done one time. So there's no atonement. How can I atone God? What can I do? People might think, well, they can say these Hail Marys and do little things like that. Those are sort of like atonements. That would be an atonement. If a priest or somebody told you to go out and do something, which I think is ridiculously, I wouldn't go do anything he told me to do. I would basically what God tells me to do, and that's to change your ways, repent, and you're not going to do anything that's going to atone. But the only atonement that is acceptable to God now that I see is the work of Jesus Christ. I can sit there and think I'm doing things for God. I don't know what else would they tell you to do, but you're just throwing things at them that if you're doing that, then you're really missing the true atonement of the action of Christ being taken, found guilty and sinless, and nailed to a crucifix, hung up, and was put to death, and was a sin offering. His blood, they stabbed him, and his blood poured out on the ground. That is the atonement, not my doing anything. If I think I'm doing something that's better than what Christ has done, boy, am I confused, misled. And then in 12 it continues, and they shall bring forth the complete calf outside the camp, and they shall incinerate the calf in which manner they incinerated the calf formerly. It is a sin offering for the congregation. Now, another unintentional sin, and this one of the ruler. And if the ruler should sin and should commit or do one trespass of all of the commandments of the Lord his God, which he should not do unintentionally, and he should sin and should trespass, and and should be made known. So we'll jump up here. And the sin by which he sinned by it shall be made known to him. Then he shall bring his gift offering. Thoron, Dora, is the name of a woman's name. Don't hear it anymore. It means a gift. He was to bring a young himaron exaigon, a young he-goat from the goats, a male unblemished again. God doesn't want anything with a blemish. And he shall place his hand upon the head of the young he-goat, and they shall slay it in the place of which they slay the whole burnt offerings before the Lord. It is a sin offering. Now, sin offering, that is something here that's very interesting. A sin offering, amartias, or amartia, either one, it depends on, it is a sin offering. Amartia, amartias. Now you see, offering, I've added it in italics. There is a word for offering, but thesi, I think, but it doesn't appear. It's called an elision. It doesn't have, it's like I was telling somebody today about this and preparing for this. It would be like an elision would be if somebody asks you the directions on something and you'd say you go to the corner and you make a right. Well, really what you're saying, he should make a right turn. But you elided turn because the person knows what you're talking about. He knows it's a turn. You make a right. It doesn't mean you make a right hand or you make a anything. It means you make a right turn. So turn is an elision if you just said make a right. So offering here is an elision. It means amartias is a sin offering. And it's not anything. It's not sin. The animal doesn't become sin in itself. I had it, another place was in 21. It was another better. I missed it. Amartia. It is a sin offering for the congregation. Amartia. Now, okay. So now you say, okay, I understand that. The word is sin. You added offering as an elision to make it understandable. But now, if you open a King James Bible, in 2 Corinthians 5:21, what do you see it saying? It says, "For he hath made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him." The King James says that he made him to be sin for us. Wrong. Wrong, King James. Boy, terrible. Because now, I'll go to 5:21. Now, if you saw it in the Greek with the Apostolic Bible, you'll see it correctly. It says, for the same as with the King James, same place, "For the one not knowing sin, he made a sin offering for us, that we should be righteousness of God in him." He didn't become sin, he became a sin offering. Here it is, amartion, the same as amartia. Amartias, different endings depending on the grammar, but basically it's all 266. So here, this is what's so important of why you want to go and look at the Greek behind it all. It gives you all sorts of other information, and you can see where some people have made mistakes in their translating. The King James elided offering, but the elision of the offering makes it sound like Jesus became sin. Well, he wasn't sin because he was sinless in other places. He didn't sin. So that's an impossibility. Now we'll go back over where we were. I think it was 24. And and the priest shall place from the blood of the one of the sin offering with the finger upon the horns of the altar of the whole burnt offerings. That's the one on the outer part. And shall pour out of all of its blood by the base of the altar of the whole burnt offerings. And that's the outer altar. And he shall offer all of its fat upon the altar as the fat sacrifice of deliverance. Now, I looked up this in the King James, and they have a peace offering for the sacrifice of deliverance. Well, I don't see peace. Peace is Irene, doesn't appear. There's no word peace in the Greek. So they came up with another cockeyed word for it, a sacrifice. And they have that it's a offering. Well, offering, sacrifice, that would be correct there. You could be sacrifice or an offering. And then it continues, and the priest shall atone for him of his sin, and it shall be forgiven to him, the ruler. Now, an individual. And if one soul, psychology, should sin unintentionally from out of the people of the land, in the committing one trespass from all of the commandments of the Lord, which should not be done, and he should trespass, and who wouldn't? And the sin should be made known to him, which he sinned by it, then he shall bring the gift offering, the thoron, the gift. That's the korban. It is to be, he shall offer an unblemished female yearling of the goats for the sin which he sinned, and he shall place his hand upon the head of his sin offering, and they shall slay the yearling of the sin offering in the place where they slay the whole burnt offerings, and inside there with that table of the altar, and the priest shall take from its blood with his finger, and shall put it upon the horns of the altar of the whole burnt offerings. He doesn't go inside of the holy place, stays out and puts it on the outer where he's burnt the animal. And all of its blood he shall pour out by the base of the altar, that's one on the outside there, and all the fat he shall remove, in which manner he removed the fat from the sacrifice of deliverance offering. And he shall offer, and the priest shall offer it upon the altar for a scent of pleasant aroma to the Lord. And the priest shall atone. Let me get to see if I can fix this. Well, I guess not. It's going back and forth whenever I go up. And the priest shall atone for him, and it shall be forgiven to him. And if he should bring a sheep for his gift for the sin offering, he shall bring an unblemished female for it. And he shall place his hand upon the head of the one for the sin offering, and they shall slay it for a sin offering in the place of which they slayed the whole burnt offerings, that is outside of the tent. And the priest, taking from the blood of the sin offering with his finger, he shall place it upon the horns of the altar, the outside altar of the whole burnt offering, and all of its blood he shall pour out by the base of the altar of the whole burnt offering. So they're all being poured out. The blood's being poured out on that outer altar. Some of the blood was sprinkled inside, and some of the blood was put on the incense altar's horns, and then on the outer altar's horns. And all of its fat he shall remove, in which manner the fat of the deliverance offering was removed. And the priest shall place it upon the altar, upon the whole burnt offering of the Lord, and the priest shall atone for the sin of which he sinned, and it shall be forgiven him. So all these things the people did, all something that Christ finished. He fulfilled the law. It's still there. The Jews still want to do that. They're able to do that, but they don't have a temple, of course. They don't have a priesthood. But they could, they will, and we'll see what happens with that. But it continues in chapter 5, and then we have the sin offering for conscious sins. Now it changes with the type of sin. Find out what that's all about. Have to join us, chapter 5. I hope you do, and I'll see you then, and God bless.